This is Burnett Pond in Savoy State Forest. We were here just this past June, which was 4 months ago. I was with Mike Jalgais from Squatchachusettes. As you can see, we were sitting here by the pond. We come down, well, at that time of year, it's getting dark about not till 8 o'clock, 8:30, and we were just sitting here talking, shooting the breeze, not doing much, just trying to settle in, and we come down this trail about 100 yards from the car over here, and right as it got dark, probably an hour later, I was just talking to Mike, and he, well, actually, to start, when we first came down, we could hear beavers slapping the water, and there's a lot of beaver dams around here, so we could really got that sound down. We've heard them before. And Mike started whistling. Now, I was sitting with him, and I just said, joking around half-heartedly, but kind of serious, I goes, Mike, you really shouldn't whistle at night. According to the Native Americans, that's a no-no. Don't answer whistles and don't whistle. And he started laughing. He goes, all right, I won't. We waited about 10 to 15 minutes, nothing, maybe a little longer. Then I was going to do a drum earlier. I goes, now's a good time. You did your whistling, nothing. It's pretty quiet anyways. We really didn't hear much except the beavers when we first come down. And I actually brought it here. I just did a couple. It's really windy now, but I did two. And nothing. And we just sat for, we didn't expect nothing. Like most nights we come out, it's really quiet, not a lot going on. But about 15, 20 minutes later, I just kind of had an odd feeling. And sure enough, straight across the pond, it was the loudest splash I've ever heard, like in a pond or a lake area where it was like dead quiet and pitch dark. And I got right up out of my seat like that. Did you hear that? He's like, absolutely. Mike has a night scope, so he was right on it, across the pond. He's like, I don't see anything. But that was a really, to imitate this, it wasn't just like your beaver slaps we were hearing. This was a kaploosh. This was like a two-sounded, very, very big object or something got thrown in the pond. Like I said, he had a scope. He sees nothing. No, I'm sitting on the edge of my seat now, and I kind of on edge because I know I just felt we weren't alone. I just felt like we're being watched, or we're not alone. And he goes, wow, that got you worked up. Mike, you heard that? And I said, if we get another rock thrown in the lake, especially if it's closer to us, I'm just letting you know I'm out of here. And I, probably another 15 minutes go by, and I was just kind of thought it was like a one and done deal, and I goes, I'm going to check the time. We're going to just go back to camp, and right when I'm doing that, Mike and I are sitting here. A rock comes. We're 15, 20 feet from the water. It landed 10 feet right here, right out in front of us. Obviously not as big as rock as it was across, but it was a splash right there, one shot. And I got right up out of my seat and all in one motion tossed my chair, and I kind of went into panic mode. I did. I have no problem saying that. I fight or flight. I definitely went into flight. I told you, Mike, we're out of here. If we're getting closer, we're out of here. So I grabbed my drum, my cooler, my chair, and we start going. Now, the whole time, I'm thinking to myself, he did the same thing as he did over on the first splash. He put the thing right here, and he's like, Dave, there's nothing in the water. I'm like, something just got tossed right there.
There's no beaver. You didn't see a beaver.
Right. He's like, there's nothing in the water. And that was a splash. That was definitely something come in the water. And so I start heading this way. I got my stuff, and now he's, don't rush. We're going to get out of here. I goes, I know we're going to, right? I actually kept gesturing, we're leaving. He jokes about it, that I was rebuking God and all this. I kind of was. We made no harm. I've heard from a lot of people they can communicate, they understand what people's intentions are, and but while we were fleeing, we're looking back and forth. I had a headlamp on, so on the trail, I'm just going back and forth. I took my eye off the trail, and you'll see going up that there's a big rut about halfway up, and all in one motion, I went in the rut because I'm looking sideways, and my chair, my cooler, my drum, I face planted it, and but I bounced right back up. All my adrenaline's going. It was like, almost like I landed on a trampoline or something. I was just up and kept going, just getting out of here, because I thought if something's that close enough to toss a rock, you probably, if you don't leave, you're going to get one in the head. So I did what I thought was the best thing, just get the heck out of here. That's what whatever it is wants. So we kind of ruled out, there's no people around here. There's no campgrounds for miles. There's no people at all. So I was pretty worked up and wound up. We got back to camp. Took me a long time to calm down and wind down and get to sleep that night. But yeah, it was pretty exciting. Exciting now that I can talk and joke about it, but it was pretty intense that night. That's as close as I've come to, an object's being tossed, especially after the first one. It's the loudest splash I ever heard. So I thought this one here was just, you didn't get the first warning. We're going to get you out of here now.
Western Massachusetts history has a distinct and colorful quality that sets it apart from the coastal, urbanized eastern half of the state. Agricultural production is often associated with scenes of pastoral tranquility, but in Western Massachusetts, it conjures memories of rebellion. The same region has played host to robust industry thanks to river power and technological innovation. It also enjoys a rich literary and cultural legacy that proceeds from its natural beauty and a strong sense of regional identity that often positions itself over and against the pretensions of Greater Boston. In 1786, an armed uprising known as Shays' Rebellion was led by Western Massachusetts farmers protesting crushing debt and the state government's perceived indifference. The rebellion culminated in a battle at the United States National Armory in Springfield and highlighted the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, directly influencing the drafting of the United States Constitution. For this reason, Shays' Rebellion is still viewed as a pivotal moment in the immediate shadow of the Revolutionary War. Shays' Rebellion epitomizes the discontent that Western Massachusetts is often felt with regard to a distant Boston-based state government. This long-simmering conflict with roots in both geographical and economic disparities has fostered an independent and sometimes forceful political outlook in the West. Unlike the maritime trade and early factories of eastern Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts industry was powered by its rivers, providing energy for numerous mills, producing textiles, paper, and other goods, memorialized with place names like Montague Book Mill, Ludlow Mills, and Ware Millyard Historic District. The National Armory in Springfield, selected by George Washington himself, was a focal point of prosperity and innovation for 200 years. The National Armory began producing muskets as early as 1794 and pioneered the development of interchangeable parts manufacturing, a key milestone not only in Massachusetts, but in American industry. In addition, Springfield came to be known as the City of Firsts for a series of innovations originating there, such as the first American gasoline-powered automobile in 1893, the first motorcycle company in 1901, and the invention of both basketball and volleyball in 1891 and 1895, respectively. The natural beauty of the Berkshire Hills have long inspired notable American authors and artists. Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick while living in Pittsfield. Edith Wharton penned Ethan Frome and the House of Mirth in Lenox, and Norman Rockwell based many paintings on scenery located in Stockbridge. An area referred to as Pioneer Valley is fertile ground for higher education, including the so-called 5 colleges: Amherst, Hampshire, Mount Holyoke, Smith, and UMass Amherst, which goes hand in hand with the region's predominantly progressive thought and practice of social activism. Abolitionists such as Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass found homes in Massachusetts, while W.E.B. Du Bois was born there and would go on to be the first African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard University. From the fertile Connecticut River Valley, reportedly New England's most productive farmland, to the more rugged Berkshires, Massachusetts' geography has consistently shaped its history, with results that are sometimes haunting. Take, for example, the lost towns of the Swift River Valley, which were disincorporated and flooded in the 1930s to create the Quabbin Reservoir, a major water source for eastern Massachusetts, sinking homesteads and memories in the process. And there is another way that the geography of Western Mass may continue to exert uneasy influence on its residents. It might be a supportive environment for an unusually large mammal, one with primate characteristics, a creature that appears to have stepped out of legend.
Western Mass from a historical perspective is very, very interesting because of the colonial period of time. It was settled very early on with a lot of colonists, and it became actually a core part of the industrial movement, I guess, in the country very early on. There were several local population centers there. The geographics of the area are really interesting with respect to the Taconic Mountains, which are actually a separate mountain range from the Berkshires and the Green Mountains. And the Taconic Mountains have their own unique qualities and valleys and the like.
Well, Western Mass has traditionally been rural. It contains the Berkshire Mountains, the beginning of a Berkshire, so it's another mountain range. Very important. There's been a lot of sightings on and around October Mountain in Western Mass. I've been up there years ago and just patrolling the area and came across the weirdest scat pile I've ever seen in the middle of the road. It was not bare, it was way too big to be bare, and it was way too weird to be anything else. So, but it traditionally has, you know, your typical sightings, but amount of it being rural and the consistency, like not much has changed in those particular areas.
I think just the history of the Native Americans and the earliest Europeans that started moving west. They've been in the earliest stories. The earliest newspapers started carrying newspaper articles, but back then they called it a wild man. Just a lot of those towns, very low population, secretive people. I think a lot of people really have to be coerced to share their experiences, and I think just a long history of the Native Americans. It's in all their journals. Like I said, the earliest Europeans that started going out. The same thing, wild man, same exact stories.
People seeing and more or less in the old days documenting these sorts of things is there. Many of the reports are credible. Today, the reports continue. Yeah.
Western Massachusetts is one of the original colonies that were created during the colonial times. It is famous for several things: the Hoosic Mountain Range, which is the oldest mountain range in North America, and it's famous for the Hoosic Tunnel, which is at one point was the longest railroad tunnel in North America. It was dug by hand during the 1800s. Western Mass couldn't be any more different than Eastern Mass. It's very rural in Western Massachusetts, and it's urban in Eastern Massachusetts. Some people refer to Western Massachusetts as Eastern New York, but we take quite exception to that.
Can you talk about the history of some of the indigenous cultures in here?
Well, oddly enough, I am from Indigenous heritage. I am an Iroquois Mohawk on my mother's side. They populated this area long before the Europeans came to town and took things over.
So Western Massachusetts is, like many parts of the Appalachian Mountains, it is part of the chain that goes from basically the Maritimes in Canada down to Georgia, Alabama, the foothills of the Appalachians. Historically, that area was, there's the Mohawk Trail. The Mohawk tribe lived in that area and operated out of there for many centuries. If you drive through there, once you basically leave Greenfield, Massachusetts, heading out towards North Adams, you're on the Mohawk Trail. So historically, that's an area very rich in Native history and folklore. Other than that, Western Massachusetts has primarily been fairly rural throughout its history, even during the colonization of Massachusetts is one of the oldest states, right? New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, these are some of the original 13 colonies. So a lot of the coastal areas were very heavily populated, but the Appalachian Mountains, like in many parts of the US at the time, the original colonies, those mountains were basically the frontier. So that part of Western Massachusetts has always been pretty rugged for the most part. There's one of the earliest ever documented supposed kind of Sasquatch encounters in the US or in North America was in Western Massachusetts. You have a story from the 1700s of these constables out in the woods hunting, and they came across this sleeping ape man kind of creature, and this is from like the 1760s when this was still part of a British colony. This wasn't the United States at the time. So yeah, New England has a long history. I think New England is overlooked because, again, people have a misconception that it's all urban when actually we are some of our northern states, like I said, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, are some of the most rural states anywhere in the US. They're all very low population. They have tons of wildlife, tons of food sources. If these states can support 70,000 moose, biologically speaking, throw 10 Sasquatch into that mix, would there not be enough biomass to support that? So I think New England, especially northern New England, and then again you look into northern Canada right there in Quebec, millions of acres, the Adirondacks, these are all contiguous sort of habitats that wildlife can traverse through. So the question of habitat isn't really a question in my mind. It's just, where do they go? How many of them are there? Do they just move around? What is going on? But there's plenty of history of encounters and stories, and there's more than I can even remember now off the top of my head.
We're in the town of Windsor, Massachusetts, inside the confines of the Windsor State Forest, and we're on Windigo Road here. Through the research that I've done up here, and through some sites that, such as the BFRO flats, I found that there were reports up here of monsters in the woods. And we're not too far from Savoy State Forest. We're one town over. We're still up here high in the Berkshires. And what's been reported to me up here over the years is of a slender, tall, Bigfoot type looking creature, but slender and not so big that we normally hear about. And there's a farmer up the road that I talked to several years ago who would see him on a regular basis. And I interviewed him. He was very hesitant to talk to me about it, but I built up his trust over the years. I had worked up here, I had lived up here, I snowmobile up here, so he was a little more apt to talk to me about it. But there was also a camp up here, a summer camp called Windigo. And there's a lot of creepy ghost stories and monster stories that are related to that. You can just find a lot about that camp on the internet. There's also an old wives' tale of a caretaker who murdered all the camp members, and that's just a wives' tale. There's no real findings behind that. There's absolutely no truth to it whatsoever, but it makes for great campfire stories. But this area is, again, part of the whole chain up here where we find all these reports of the Bigfoot being seen up here.
You think there's any relation between why this place is called Windigo and maybe some of the stories?
It would be great to find that out. I just haven't found the people that have that information. And you can certainly Google it, and there's tons of stuff. This road has its own wiki page on Wikipedia. And the stories go back, about a century that I know of. And he had a Bigfoot sticker on his Jeep. That's kind of funny.
Just goes to show,
It
right?
goes to show, yeah. Here we are we're in the heart of the Berkshires. This is the least populated area of the state up here. This town has a population of about 1,000. Next town over is about 1,300. Our elevation's around 2,000 feet up here. There's more state land than there is privately owned land up here. And if you're going to look for an elusive creature running around Massachusetts, this is where they're going to be.
The history of indigenous people in western Massachusetts spans over 10,000 years and involves several Algonquian-speaking communities, including the Pocumtuck, Nipmuc, Nonotuck, Agawam, and Mohican or Stockbridge peoples. Before the arrival of Europeans, these communities followed a seasonal economy and tended to stay in one place for much of the year. They established villages near rivers and waterfalls in the spring and summer to fish and plant crops like corn, squash, and beans. In the fall, they moved inland in smaller groups to hunt, and in the winter they formed larger camps in sheltered locations. These communities often had complex social and political structures and were normally organized into larger confederations. For example, the Pocumtuck Paramount Chiefdom controlled a large territory in the Connecticut River Valley. As has often been noted, European contact beginning in the 1500s had catastrophic effects on the indigenous population, beginning with disease. The introduction of diseases such as smallpox and bubonic plague, to which native people had no natural immunity, caused a great dying, eliminating as much as 90% of the native population in the early 17th century. English colonists habitually viewed the land as empty, despite its active management by native peoples, and used deeds to claim permanent ownership of land they viewed as wilderness, setting up an irreconcilable clash with indigenous understandings of civilization and land stewardship. Tensions of this nature boiled over into bloody conflict, such as King Philip's War, which began in 1675, in which an alliance of Native American tribes led by Wampanoag Chief Metacom, also known as King Philip, did battle with the colonists of New England and their Native American allies. The war was a last-ditch effort by the native tribes to stop English expansion and assert their self-governance. The war was one of the most lethal in American history on a per capita basis. Thousands of Native Americans died, many from starvation or disease, and hundreds were sold into slavery. At least 600 colonists were killed, and numerous towns were completely destroyed. In the end, the war crushed the power of the Native American tribes in southern New England, paving the way for unimpeded English expansion and settlement. Despite centuries of displacement, indigenous people have carried on and are a vital part of the 21st century landscape in Massachusetts. Today, indigenous communities and individuals continue their cultural traditions and advocate for their heritage. These include the Nipmuc Nation, the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapoag, and the Wampanoag tribes, Mashpee and Aquinnah, who are federally recognized. And there are continuing efforts to preserve art, music, language, stories, and traditions. The Okiteo Cultural Center in Ashfield is dedicated to this purpose.
Well, throughout New England, there are numerous different tribes. There's probably about a half dozen different Algonquin derivative tribes. Western Mass, I think, had several. The Napmuc being one, I think, in particular that inhabited that area of Western Mass. But spread throughout all of southern New England and northern New England, there's various tribes that go quite a ways back in time.
There's the Algonquins. There's so many tribes in New England that are barely hanging on. You know, it's been so diluted over the years, but mostly was Iroquois in this part of the New England.
What you heard initially was on the other side over there?
Yeah, right out in there.
And you guys investigated that area the next day?
Mike did, actually. And I stayed on this side. I poked around down here, but there's a trail that comes right out these woods here. I don't know if you can see that trail, and it goes right to behind that tree. It goes right down the side of the pond, and it goes right down to where we were sitting. So that was my guess on it, that either there was multiples and they communicated something to get them out of here, or the one that threw the big one over there had time to come up this trail, come right behind us, and that's just what I theorized, that you're not heeding the warning. I'm going to toss another one, get you out of here. I've heard other stuff. I've heard tree snaps. I've seen trees come down, but far enough away and with other people, I felt pretty safe. We had thermals. But this one, we're kind of down in a bowl. If you see this area, you come down the trail, we're just in a bowl surrounded by woods. And if things know this area particularly well, there's a lot of trails that go right around, all around. And it's not used by a lot of people. There's maybe an odd fisherman here and there, a local. I had more of a feeling more than I kept telling Mike, that wasn't a beaver. And he goes, you keep repeating yourself. And I goes, but I don't feel right. He even said, you're all wound up about this. Boy, this really got to you. And I just kept wearing it out. It wasn't a beaver. It wasn't a beaver. I know it wasn't a beaver, he says. And sure enough, the second one wasn't, because he looked around all night with the night scope, never saw anything. Only when we came down here at first. They slapped the water a few times, then they were gone. If you could look out here, you can see a couple beaver dams out there. I think they all just went and figured out we were hanging out here. They took off, and there's no way anything else around here. There's no people around here. There's no yahoos. And yeah, to answer your question, I'm long-winded about it, but that was probably the hackles on my neck the most I ever felt was that night.
The forests and rivers that make western Massachusetts attractive to outdoor enthusiasts also enabled villages to thrive during the industrial period of the 19th century. The Housatonic, Hoosic, Millers, Connecticut, Green, Westfield, and Deerfield rivers and their tributaries all provided power to mills that produced everything from woolen fabric to leather shoes to paper. Through the first half of the 1800s, western Massachusetts produced an enormous variety of goods. Mills on the Westfield River manufactured cloth, paper, and abrasives, and processed quarried stone. Those on the Green, Connecticut, Deerfield, and Millers rivers turned out furniture, tools, sewing machines, and even tapioca. A farmer named Levi Dickinson innovated the use of sorghum to make brooms in 1797, giving birth to a local industry that supplied brooms to many markets beginning in Boston. The town of Orange had many prosperous industries, including shoes and boots, hats, and the 1899 Grout Automobile Company, considered the first automobile plant in America. The Deerfield River still powers Lamson and Goodnow, the country's oldest continuously operating cutlery manufacturer. Local railroads transported raw materials, finished goods, and factory workers before highways became a quicker and less expensive alternative. Signs of the railroad's early infrastructure are still found throughout the region. These days, many people are drawn to the woods of western Massachusetts for its rich variety of recreational activities. Visitors to the Berkshires can enjoy hiking, golf, kayaking, canoeing and whitewater rafting, camping, horseback riding, skiing, and snowshoeing, all of which place people outside, in the elements. Websites promoting outdoor recreation in western Massachusetts tout approximately 550 locations devoted to exploration of the natural landscape. With so many places to choose from, and an estimated 4 million tourists visiting annually, it's only a matter of time before a handful of those travelers see something they can't explain.
Massachusetts has a great number of state parks and state campgrounds, which definitely brings the population into the woods. That's how I had my encounter. I was actually working at a state park many, many years ago.
So I don't think a lot of people realize that New England is actually one of the most heavily forested regions of North America, especially in the United States, specifically northern New England. So most people, when they think of New England, they think of, oh, it's all Boston, it's Cape Cod, it's coastal, it's very urban, not a lot of rural. Actually, most of New England is completely rural. New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine are three of the highest, most forested states in the U.S. Maine is at number 1, like 90-something% forested. New Hampshire is 80-something%. Interestingly enough, West Virginia is number 3, and Vermont is number 4. So again, we're within the top 5 for most percentage of forests. So a lot of people just live in rural areas. So a lot of the encounters that I've heard over the years or been told about are people a lot of times just, they live in the woods. So they're having stuff ongoing. And you know, one thing will happen. They'll hear something knock on the side of their house. They'll find a strange footprint or a handprint on their car. And it might even take years for them to realize, once they start doing research, am I dealing with Bigfoot type stuff or Sasquatch activity? So a lot of people in New England are very into the outdoors. We have a huge hiking, backpacking, fishing, hunting culture going back hundreds of years. So there's just a lot of people out in the woods in general in New England. Even if they don't live, you know, let's say they live in Boston or the urban areas, it's only a 2.5, 3-hour drive to be in some very pristine wilderness. So I've heard reports from people from all walks of life, people that are college professors to police officers to just out in the woods hiking, people who live in the woods. So there's not really anything any unifying characteristics between some of the witnesses in New England, other than the fact that they were all in an area that has plenty of other types of wildlife, plenty of other types of flora and fauna that, you know, habitats that could potentially support something like a Sasquatch.
Well, certainly Western Mass, because it's a beautiful place. It's got Mount Greylock's the tallest mountain in Massachusetts. It's I think close to 3,400 feet. Between the mountains and the river valleys, the wildlife, there's lots of things to do in the summertime as well as in the wintertime. In the summertime, there's many different types of trails. There's many different excellent fishing lakes. There's a really large body of water in Western Mass called the Quibbin Reservoir that brings people there for boating, recreation, fishing, and the like.
In Western Mass, there is there's camping, extreme big mountain that brings tourists in. They go to the top of Greylock and the view is magnificent from the top there. So it's a big tourist attraction to get people into the Berkshires.
I think mostly recreation, where I've researched a lot in the beginning, is lower level, closer to the coast, very swampy and boggy, not a lot of elevation, but as you move out past Worcester and central part of Mass, it gets a lot more hilly. The hills pick up a lot of rolling hills and farms out to the mountains and the Berkshires.
Western Massachusetts is home to an array of wildlife that compares favorably with any forested region of the United States. Mammals are especially represented in forested areas like the Berkshires and around the Quabbin Reservoir. Black bears are common and have a growing population primarily in the west. Moose are found in the northern and western parts of the state, and white-tailed deer are found statewide. Bobcats are the only wildcat found in the state and are common in western Massachusetts. Eastern coyotes are present throughout the state. Red and gray foxes are common and can be seen year-round. Fishers, members of the weasel family, are secretive, but common throughout the state. Also present are river otters, minks, long-tailed weasels, and American ermines. Beavers also are common and abundant, known for creating important wetland habitats. Raccoons, skunks, opossums, groundhogs, eastern gray squirrels, red squirrels, and eastern chipmunks are widespread and commonly encountered, sometimes even in developed areas. Porcupines, moles, muskrats, and bats are also found in the region. New England and eastern cottontail rabbits are the two species of rabbits in the state. A variety of birds, including migratory species, use the region's diverse habitats. Wild turkeys are everywhere across the Berkshires and the rest of the state. Pileated woodpeckers, blue herons, egrets, warblers, and various waterfowl and game birds like ruffed grouse and pheasant can be found. The area supports various reptiles and amphibians. Snakes found in the area include garter snakes, ringneck snakes, milk snakes, eastern hognose snakes, northern water snakes, and the venomous, state-endangered timber rattlesnakes, found only in isolated hilly areas. Amphibians such as yellow-spotted salamanders and northern leopard frogs are also present. And then there's the bog turtle. The forests of the Berkshire and Taconic Highlands of western Massachusetts link the Green Mountains of Vermont to the Hudson Highlands of New York, creating a connected corridor of habitat for wide-ranging species. This geography, known as the Berkshire Wildlife Linkage, has an estimated 75% forest cover and includes the most intact forest ecosystem in southern New England. The linkage sits within the northern range of the Appalachian Mountains and is among the most important areas in all of New England for long-term survival of rare and endangered species. It may, in fact, be an area in which unclassified species find space and shelter to exist.
Oh, you've got, certainly when we think of sort of larger creatures, black bears used to be great habitat for mountain lions. There are some that will still say that they believe they're there. I don't necessarily, I think they may come through at times. It's certainly a great area to think about restoring them. That would be an unbelievable habitat there. Possibly moose at times roaming into that area, certainly white-tailed deer. Atlantic salmon if we get into some of the smaller creatures, but yeah, really a fascinating, still very wild habitat. And I challenge people that have spent time out west, drive for instance the Mohawk Trail down into Western Mass or through Western Mass, even the interstate there, and you'll be struck by how seemingly remote and very western and rugged it really is.
Is it, so to speak, like a rich environment or a limited environment? How close to Boston type of question?
Oh, you know, Western Mass is really a world away, literally and figuratively, from Boston. And again, as I said, it is very Western in terms of the ruggedness, the feel of the country. One thing I always like to point out in the east versus the west, say east of the Mississippi versus west, is the biodiversity and the biomass. In the east, in the eastern woodland forest, to me, is far in excess of what we see in the west, the diversity of the species. So I just feel like that area is very rich, and much of this is true for a lot of New England as well.
Can you speak to what the geography is like in the area?
You've got some very steep river canyons and stream canyons. You've got mountains. Certainly the Berkshires come to mind, the Taconic Range of New York. Woodlands that are dense and deep and dark, as Robert Frost might say. And then you've got, you know, other habitats as well, meadows. You've got some agriculture. Of course, you've got suburbia and in some cases urbia, more cities. But a lot of that area is relatively undeveloped and still quite wild.
We have white-tailed deer, we have moose, we have bobcat. There are sightings of large cats here, catamounts, mountain lions. We have a tremendous amount of wild turkey.
So New England, especially northern New England, there are a lot of different types of mammals. One of the biggest ones is the moose. So we have a subspecies of moose called the eastern moose here, which is one of the largest in North America, really only trumped by the western moose and the Alaska Yukon moose, which are just ice age monsters. But it's not uncommon for eastern moose to be upwards of 800 to 1,000 pounds for a large adult male. So we're talking a very large and potentially very dangerous animal. I mean, that when I'm out in the woods, other than ticks, which are one of the biggest threats here, which are very minuscule, I'm mostly concerned about moose. You don't want to come upon a cow moose with her calf, right? That's not a situation you want to be in. They can be very aggressive, very dangerous animals. Other than moose, we have plenty of black bear. I should say statistically, Maine has upwards of 50 to 70,000 moose. That is the largest amount of moose anywhere in the US outside of Alaska. And Maine supposedly also has 30,000 black bear. New Hampshire has a few thousand moose, a few thousand black bear, but I mean, the animals don't know the borders between Maine and New Hampshire, so they could easily cross between into Vermont. And then you have millions of acres in Canada right above us, millions of acres in the Adirondacks just to the west of Vermont. So we have a lot of large animals, we have a lot of large mammals. Like I said, moose, black bear, we have tons of deer. White-tailed deer are almost everywhere. They're very ubiquitous throughout New England, even in the southern part of New England in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut. And then of course, when you start getting down to the smaller mammals, we have gray fox, red fox, raccoons, porcupines, pretty much every type of woodland animal that is native to this region we have, other than mountain lions, which a lot of people believe are actually making a comeback. That's the only really large animal, other than the wolves as well, that have been extirpated, which is basically means they're extinct in this area. But again, there's people who claim to have seen plenty of mountain lions and even wolves in this area.
Is it a very rich environment? Is it more limited?
It's a very, very rich environment. You have everything from small mammals to larger mammals. Obviously, white deer. You have, there have actually been reports of cougars. There's mink, there's rabbits, skunks, possums, all kinds of, really essentially all kinds of mammals, including actually moose as well. Moose have been reported in Western Mass frequently, so yeah.
There is. You don't really see a lot because a lot of times when we go out in the day, we really don't see a whole lot. We've seen coyote, porcupine, moose, deer, otter, a lot of raccoon, skunks. But as far as, like I said, like this is my 20th year in this, I've never seen a bear. I've seen a lot of porcupine, a lot of the smaller mammals, but I've only seen one moose ever in my life. So they are, not just the Bigfoot, but all the animals very elusive. I think they hear you coming up the trail and they hear you long before you know they're there. So I think that's why there's a lot of going out and not seeing anything a lot of days.
I think it's realistic to think that it's possible, you know, and that's one of my, I don't want to say frustration, but a challenge, I think, in science is it seems like scientists are fairly polarized about these types of subjects. Either they have interest or they don't, and if they don't, they tend to just poo-poo it, which I don't think is very scientific, and I try not to be judgmental, and so they can think what they want. I look at science as having an open mind and trying to work as hard to disprove things that we believe in as prove them. I think that's the hallmark of a really good scientist. But I do believe that having an open mind, it is possible that there could be this giant sort of undocumented hominid primate creature out there. I know I've spent much of my life in the woods, both as a hobbyist as a kid, but as a professional, as a biologist, as an outdoors person, leading tracking and survival classes, all sorts of different things, recreation, whatever. And the number of times I've seen a bear in the wild, a moose in the wild. I've never seen, without the aid of hounds, a mountain lion in the wild. And yet these creatures are very common in many areas, including not so much mountain lions, but in many areas of New England, moose are highly abundant. Black bears, incredibly common, and yet it's fairly rare that we see them. And if we do, it's oftentimes crossing a road as we're driving, not when we're out hiking. And this often fits with what people describe for Sasquatch and these types of animals or creatures, is seeing them crossing a road in the middle of the night, or maybe getting a glimpse of one in the forest where it's a clear glimpse. And we know, okay, I saw that animal, that's a black bear, I saw that animal, it's a moose, but it was just a glimpse. I didn't have time to get a photograph. I didn't have time to do anything but just see it, registered, and then it was done, right? And so I think when people think about these animals and the fact that, well, why isn't anybody seeing? Why don't we have a dead one? I've never seen a dead moose in the wild except when I was literally studying gray wolves in Minnesota. And we were looking for things like that and radio tracking wolves and moose, right? I don't think I've ever seen a dead bear in the wild. Never seen even a living mountain lion in the wild without the aid of hounds. So again, these animals, even though they're fairly common, aren't necessarily readily observable. And so I do think it's quite feasible that there could be one of these, or a population of these large, undocumented primates.
You mentioned the description of some of the stories out here, like tall, slender.
Yeah, the two different people that I've talked to, I don't know that they've associated each other with the sightings, but they live on the same road, so I would assume that they've seen the same creature. It's a tall, slender type of a monster covered in hair. Red. They both describe it as reddish brown, and mostly just they catch a quick glimpse of it looking at them or watching them, and then as quick as they see it, it's gone. And not more than 10 miles from here, we get lots of activity, people seeing Bigfoot, Sasquatch type creatures. But the Wendigo, from what I've learned through my research and through the readings of like Lauren Coleman and the other people that have written about the Wendigo, is that it's a mystical creature that has powers, and it's not to be messed with. So I'm told that you shouldn't even say the name. So we tend to avoid this area unless we're specifically looking for something. No sense poking a bear, you know.
The October Mountain State Forest, named by none other than renowned author Herman Melville for its autumnal beauty, is the location of what are likely the most well-known Sasquatch sightings on record in western Massachusetts. One such encounter took place August 21, 1983, near an abandoned Boy Scout camp on the banks of Felton Lake. Around 10 p.m., 4 friends were enjoying a late meal when they began to hear the sounds of something large making its way through the adjacent forest. Their initial approach was to ignore the rustling in favor of their food and fellowship, but the noises persisted, and after a couple hours of disturbance, 2 of the young men decided to investigate. The 18 and 22-year-old, likely full of youthful confidence, set off down the trail, just 100 yards outside of camp. They observed their stalker. In a quote given to the local paper, the Berkshire Eagle, one of the witnesses said, "It stood on 2 legs, silhouetted on the trail in the moonlight, and it was huge. I don't scare easily, but it scared me." The boys ran back to camp, and within an hour they had packed up, loaded the car, and were about to head home when they caught movement in their headlights. The relative safety of their vehicle afforded them a longer, more illuminated view of a bulky figure crouching in the nearby bushes. The creature, covered in dark brown hair, had eyes that seemed to glow. The awestruck witnesses agreed that at its full height, the stealthy squatter would likely stand between 6 and 7 feet tall. 6 years later, a lone hiker got an extraordinary look at a similar entity while hiking October Mountain. According to a report submitted to the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, the eyewitness was hiking a well-established trail on October Mountain in late July 1989. Approaching the top of the 1,200-foot mountain, the witness observed motion about 100 yards ahead on the trail, with low brush and scrub making it difficult to see clearly. At first, all that could be seen were arms moving and an occasional glimpse of a fur-covered body, making a large black bear the initial suspect. Pulling out a pair of 40-power binoculars, the hiker attempted to focus on the object. Although initially difficult because of the brush, at one point the animal moved into a slight clearing, and it was then that the realization dawned that what was being observed was something very unusual. The creature was very tall and slightly stooped. Its body was massive and covered completely with reddish hair. The head was rather pointed and covered with hair. The face was dark in color and had less hair than the top of the head. The neck seemed to be non-existent. At that moment, it turned toward the witness, who was absolutely shocked to see the figure looked very human. At this point, the frightened hiker took measures to hide, but had the presence of mind to continue observation. The human-like cryptid was still in the small clearing and seemed very occupied. It was moving stones and small pieces of wood and grubbing for either roots or insects, for its large arm could be seen moving to its mouth every so often. While feeding, it was stacking rocks after moving them, one on top of the other. Wanting to confirm that this was not a man in a fur coat or a monkey suit, the eyewitness was able to close a gap of 20 yards while staying downwind. Locating a good observation area, it became readily apparent the thing was not human. The arms were unusually long, extending past the kneecaps, and the face seemed distorted and elongated. The fur seemed to be tipped with a lighter color of red. The hiker, deeply frightened at this point, began to run back to the trail. Looking back during the retreat, it was noticed that the animal had its head back and was slowly moving back into the forest. The Sasquatch gave no indication that it was aware of the hiker's presence. Nevertheless, the individual who filed the report admitted to being frightened severely for several weeks and would not hike in that area of the mountain without a hiking partner and a rifle. A more recent sighting, investigated for the BFRO by Jonathan Wilk, involves a husband and wife from Connecticut traveling by RV near Williamstown in Berkshire County. At approximately 1 p.m. on September 5, 2015, the couple was heading north on Route 7, doing about 40 miles per hour, when the woman observed an immense figure walking through a field at a distance of 150 yards. The duration of the sighting was about 4 to 5 seconds, long enough to note that the figure was covered in black fur and was in the range of 9 feet tall, walking at a smooth, steady pace with long arms down by its side. In his follow-up report, Wilk notes that the creature appeared to be heading towards a tree line near the Hoosick River, and that a motorist had gone on record with a similar report not far from this location, dating back to 2006.
So when it comes to Bigfoot encounters in New England, I mean, to me, when I think of Bigfoot encounters or some of the best areas with habitat, I think of western Massachusetts, pretty much the whole state of Vermont, almost all of New Hampshire, and most of northern Maine. Northern Maine is pretty much a wilderness area. It's millions of acres of land that is actually not federally or state owned, so it's a little bit of an anomaly. It's mostly logging country, and that's where you got tens of thousands of moose and bear. And there's been a lot of encounters I've heard over the years, and I've been doing it for about 10 years now, taking reports mostly from New Hampshire, but that's also extended into other parts of New England, primarily Vermont and Maine as well. And I've had a few strange things happen to myself, wood knock related, stuff being thrown. Nothing I can definitively say is Sasquatch, but there are quite a few encounters that I've been told that really stick out to me. One of my favorite ones is by Jonathan Wilk, who is somebody I've come to know for over 10 years now. And while he was a park ranger in western Massachusetts, in Savoy Mountain State Forest, he had a really interesting encounter in the early 90s where he was working, doing his rounds, getting trash, collecting trash at the various pickup sites they had in the state forest, and he encountered 2 of these Sasquatch-like creatures. And the credibility that John brings to the table is really interesting. He's somebody that he's done a lot of work for the government. He's worked for FEMA. He was a 9/11 responder. He was in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. I mean, his pedigree he's a very legit guy, and I've come to know him very well, and his encounter was intriguing for a variety of reasons. And there's other people I've gotten to know over the years that have had interesting encounters, tent encounters. A good friend of mine, Brian, somebody I've come to know now very well and hike with him regularly, and he's in actually a lot of my Beyond the Trail and Strange Places videos. He had an interesting encounter up in the White Mountains while camping with his family, and something pushed its hand up against the tent, and he thought maybe somebody was messing with him, and he heard this vocalization that basically said reverberated through his chest, and he felt absolutely fearful. And he never thought it was Bigfoot until years later, I'm watching a show where somebody else had a similar kind of tent encounter.
Yeah, so I've investigated just shy of probably 100 reports over the years, and there's several right in this area that come to mind, and we actually visited those sites earlier today. There was the roadside crossing with the bus driver. There were the trackway that was found about 10 miles from here, and then there was the retired couple who were driving an RV at the Massachusetts line, looked out into the field and saw one running alongside the tree line. That's one of my favorite sightings. There was a school teacher not far from here who had one walk right out in front of her and her dog. There's several along the Appalachian Trail that come to mind. So there's numerous ones, more than one would think. My friend Dave and another Squatchachusettes member had an encounter just a week ago.
I think it was in 2014. A report was submitted to the BFRO site regarding a snowmobiler who was out snowmobiling in March of 2014, and he was in the Cobble Mountain area, which actually has some folklore associated with it, as known as the Cobble Mountain Critter. And that whole area, October Mountain, that whole connection, that whole ecosystem through there, all the way down to the Quabbin Reservoir, has had reports over many, many years, actually over decades. So I was intrigued by the fact that this experience had occurred in this general area. So when I contacted him and interviewed me, he was out snowmobiling with a couple of his buddies in the late afternoon in March, early March, and he came across several deep tracks cutting across the snowmobile trail. He stopped the snowmobile and he got out and he looked and he thought, why are these footprints here out in the middle of nowhere? And they're unusually large, deep, and the strides between the steps were really, really long. So he was so interested in it that he actually came back a couple days later, took some pictures and sent those pictures to me, and I looked at the pictures and they're very, very convincing, to the extent that it would be really, really hard for a human to go out there and replicate that kind of, those kind of footprints in that environment, that time of year. That was a really interesting interview, and I found the gentleman to be very, very sincere. And related to that, around that same time, I think it was a couple months earlier, I had actually done a report about 20 miles south of there, of a gentleman that was out of his house at night smoking a cigarette one night and heard some very loud wood knocks. So I think that area does have a lot of activity associated with it.
We're still in Savoy. We're on, I think it's Blackbriar Road, which is on the outskirts of Savoy State Forest. I was back in 1983. It was a BFRO report. A husband and wife were out looking for land to build a house, which they now live up here. So you're talking just over 50 years ago. It was a little darker than this, and creature ran from the right to the left, and it crossed this road, and they said just a couple of steps. And one thing that they noticed was the way its feet stepped over it, it's like it was separate from the body, in which we hear that a lot, where the legs were moving differently from the swing of the arms. But they said it made it across the road in just a couple of steps. And as quick as they saw it, it was gone. They both looked at each other. They're like, what was that? And they didn't talk about it until it's about 15, 16 years ago that they reported it to the BFRO, and it's in the BFRO database.
Did you take that case?
I took the case. I interviewed them. Really, it didn't really make the criteria to find its way into the public side of the database, but it's still sitting there in flats. So one thing about when you look up a report on the BFRO and you say you pulled up Massachusetts, you might only find 20 or 30 reports, but there's literally 400 or 500 of them in the background in the flat section where the investigators go to. And a lot of them just don't make the criteria, or there's incomplete information. And a lot of that comes down to, between me, Dave, and Mike, and a couple other people, of not really having the time to follow up on them, or people, the points of contact. You know, a phone number from 1983 doesn't really work too well. But because the sighting was in '83, but the report was back in 15 years ago, we had a point of contact with them. And they live not too far from here. I see them maybe every couple other years or so. I run into them, and we just smile and wave. But yeah, so we're not more than a couple, 3 miles from where Dave had his encounter this summer and where I had my encounter many years ago. The reports continue to pile up out here, and I think we probably only hear about 1 or 2% of them. I always say, if you're ever at a cocktail party in one of these towns, bring up the subject of Bigfoot, and somebody's got a story for you.
One of the more intriguing encounters, I don't know if it's Bigfoot or not, but it's a very weird one, took place in the White Mountains. It's one of the first reports I took when I was sort of doing the investigating on my own. I actually reached out to this guy, and he's since passed away, but I talked to him for quite a while. He had an encounter in the Ossipee Mountains of New Hampshire, where he was rock collecting and looking for minerals up there, and him and his girlfriend and their dog, they came upon this kind of ledge up on this mountain, and there was this stacked stone structure, stacked stones of some kind. And he said inside of it was sitting this large creature with its back turned towards them, and it almost had this dirty, matted looking kind of fur and kind of gross looking, and they didn't know what they were looking at. And they had bushwhacked to get here, so it's not like they'd gone up a trail or anything. He said the dogs noticed it and started growling, and kind of this low growl, and this thing let out some kind of this strange guttural noise. He said it went right through them, terrified them. They basically started running back down the mountain after this. It was about halfway down they realized they had a camera on them, but they didn't have the courage to go back up there. So that's a weird one, and I remember talking to him and saying, well, you know, what do you think it was? Did you think it was a Bigfoot? He's like, I don't know if it was a Bigfoot or not. It was just this strange creature. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. He said there wasn't a day that went by that he didn't think about this, and this encounter happened in 1979. And it took him a year to get back up there. And when he got back to that location, he came upon this clearing, and there was no evidence of this stacked stone structure. There was one, for example, of a guy sent me an email, and we kind of exchanged emails a little bit. He basically threw a snowball at this creature that he thought was somebody in a large costume playing a prank on him and his sister as they were playing in the snow in southern New Hampshire back in the 80s. And he described it as looking like the Juggernaut from Marvel Comics, because he said it had no neck and it was this sort of hulking figure, and he actually threw a snowball at it, and the snowball went over its shoulder and it walked off into the woods at that point. So maybe that's the only encounter I'm aware of where there's a snowball fight with a Sasquatch, if you want to say that. There's the story of the Hollis Flea Market from the 1970s, in which a kind of hysteria was brought up in Hollis, New Hampshire, of this guy who was setting up for the flea market there, and some creature was shaking his camper van, and him and his sons had seen this creature. And there was I talked to a MUFON investigator who believed that the guy made up the story, but then there was also a anthropologist from Harvard University named Carlton Kuhn who investigated the sighting and did lie detector tests on the gentleman and his sons and believed they were telling the truth. And he wrote a paper called Why There Has to Be a Sasquatch based off that. And I believe he was in touch with Dr. Grover Krantz at the time. So there's a whole host of stories like this.
The most memorable one is your typical, just a couple of people hiking out in the woods, and there it was. And it kind of just looked at him for a second, turned around, and walked off. And that was really the first one was always the most memorable to me for that area. But it was in the October Mountain State Forest. It was another great place to, look. Now there's a lot of other state forests in Massachusetts, and I've been to one in particular where, a couple of researchers that were out there were having some experiences with particularly maybe a little aggressive action. Was doing a lot of rock throwing at their vehicle. I had gone out there with them one night, and they wanted to kind of sit in the vehicle, and that's not me. So, they just want to sit and listen. No, I want to get out and I want to explore. So as we started walking up one trail, I decided to do a couple of whoops. I don't know if I was whoops or tree knocks or maybe both. But then all of a sudden the response was something pushing a tree over. So that was very, very interesting. And as we know, that is something that primates will use as a display. They'll start pushing things and start wrecking, basically trashing things to kind of intimidate people. That was in Western Mass, exactly sure. I believe it was near the Savoy State Forest.
I tell you, one recollection I have is of a biologist in northern Maine on a national wildlife refuge up there. It actually was a graduate student doing work, and told a co-student of hers that she had seen out in the middle of nowhere, right? Northern Maine, very, very remote, few people around, that she'd seen a naked man on the refuge, at night. And I have to believe that her mind was trying to help her sort of explain that. But I believe probably what she saw was some sort of creature that she didn't want to go that far and say as a scientist and a student and, jeopardizing her career and her credibility. But I'm pretty sure that what she saw was not just a naked man, but probably a wild man type creature of some kind, a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, whatever we want to call it.
Sightings are by accident. The woman sitting out sky watching, it ran right in front of her. Someone driving the road and it runs across. So those seem like the people that really see it more and by chance. And the people that are out looking, good luck, because it's a step ahead of you.
My question is like, what are people looking for? Do people want to hear a wood knock? Do people want to see a Sasquatch? It's good. Good luck. Like Dave just said, it's going to be random. My working hypothesis is that when people do have encounters up here, I feel like these creatures aren't paying attention. And it's only because of their lack of attention that we have an encounter. Because they know we're in the area. I've gotten out of the car a little ways from here and gotten out of the car, heard a wood knock. I'm like, oh, let's get out of here. You know, we know they're here. They know we're here, so we're not going to surprise anybody tonight. There's monsters in Massachusetts. There's creature up here that we don't know what it is. It's never been classified. I hope someday that there's some answers out there, because I probably have more questions about it than anybody. I'd like to know what it was. I'd like to know what they are. I'd like to know how they're surviving up here. How is this possible relic hominid surviving up here, living right among us? And I think just a lot more people have encounters than they're willing to talk about. And I think there's a lot of people that have encounters that don't realize they had encounters. You know, something goes missing in the yard, or some apples go missing from a tree. They just attribute it to regular wildlife. I mean, not everything is a Sasquatch, not everything is a Bigfoot. You know, how many times do you see a bear in the woods? You know, you don't see too many. You know, you do see them, but it's very rare. You see a lot of deer, but you know, if there's this intelligent creature that is living up here, I don't think it's up here all the time. I think they come through. They're seen all up and down this area, all the way up from the Canadian border, all the way down to Virginia. They're seen all around up here. What are they? Don't know. But the mystery, again, back to the mystery and the journey. Here we are again today.
I'm going to say, speaking of the journey, this is
6 months later.
The spot where we are right now.
Yeah,
I mean, if you hadn't seen this thing, we probably wouldn't be.
We wouldn't be here today. I would have never met you or Dave or Tim and Eric or everybody else that's crossed our paths.
We come back the next morning, and the grass at this time of year was almost up to our knees. This wasn't cut. They don't use this pond down there. And from the dew, we could see something right in these bushes that looked like it was all flattened down from the night before, or something walked in there. And where the rock hit, we were just lining it up. We got the pictures to show that something could have been, by the time between the first splash, had plenty of time to come around this trail and come right behind us. That's just my opinion on it, but
I mean,
yeah.
That time of year, it's pretty loud out here, yeah?
Right. It was pitch dark.
I'm sure there's probably frogs and stuff.
Yeah, we never heard nothing come up, but that's all we could theorize. The next morning when we saw this area, it looked like something had come through. It almost looked like a game trail or something came right into these bushes right here, which would have, if this did do it, it did it right over our seats right here. We're sitting, and it splashed right in the water right there. And like I said, Mike had the cooler head, and I went into flight mode, and I wasn't going to fight, so I decided flight, and I took off. He did too, all the way, like I said, all the way up the trail. He was trying to calm me down, and I let myself get into a panic. I was kind of hyperventilating, and Mike, let's just get out of here. Let's just get out of here. Dave, stay calm, stay calm. So he was the cooler head in that. And then we've looked on the maps before we even come down here. There's nothing on that side for miles and miles. No houses, no development, just state forest. All around us, really. There's not a lot out here. There's one pond that they use for recreation, and that's miles away at the campground. So we kind of like ruled out a lot of stuff. And again, it is what it is. There's nothing to prove it, nothing. I have no other way to prove it. Just I can just say what happened to me, that's all.
And then how far are we from where John's encounter from the early 90s happened?
I think we're only like 2 or 3 miles away from that encounter. And Balance Rocks, I think, in between from there. So there's a lot of history around this particular area here.